Beneath the streets of Old Sacramento, there is a second city. Not ruins, not rubble. The original buildings, first floors still standing, doorways still intact, storefronts preserved exactly where the flood left them. Walk through those passages today, and you are moving through a neighborhood the city chose to bury rather than abandon. 14 feet of fill was packed on top, and Sacramento built itself directly above. The original front doors became basement windows. That decision, to entomb an entire district and start again on top of it, tells you what this flood was capable of, and it tells you how a city learns to live inside a trap it cannot leave. California, 1861. The water does not come in one storm. It comes in 43. The Central Valley looks flat on a map. What it actually is? A bowl. Mountain ranges on both sides. Most of its water trying to escape through one narrow gap at the Carquinez Strait. When the rivers can't drain fast enough, the valley fills. And Sacramento sits at the lowest position possible, flat ground near the junction of two major rivers. In 1839, John Sutter arrived at that confluence and built the settlement that would become Sacramento. His party found flood debris already caught high in the trees. The Nisenan and Miwok people warned him directly. The lowlands turned to water in winter. Sutter listened. He placed his fort on higher ground, a mile back from the river. The city that grew up around it did not. And then, Sacramento made the problem structural. Railroad track was laid along the top of the levee. Flood defense and rail embankment became a single continuous earth wall with poor drainage on the inside. What the city called protection was in fact a bowl with no drain. There was a second problem already building upstream. Hydraulic mining had been tearing California's hillsides apart for years, flushing the waste into every river draining toward the valley. In places, riverbeds had already risen by 12 feet. The channels had lost capacity before the first storm hit, and the flood itself would keep filling them in real time. Then, the weather closed the trap. What struck California that winter was a 43-day chain of storms. Wave after wave for nearly 6 weeks. Cold locked the Sierra Nevada, the mountain range running the full length of California's eastern edge, first. Snow piled deep. The ground froze hard. Then, on the night of January 8th, the warm storm arrived. Warm rain on a deep frozen snowpack is not just rain. Think of a sponge packed with ice. Pour warm water on it, it does not run off the surface. It seeps in, melts the ice from the inside out, and suddenly releases everything it was storing, plus everything you poured. The Sierra Nevada worked the same way. The warm rain did not sit on top of the snowpack. It penetrated, converted the frozen interior to runoff, and triggered every river draining the mountains to release at once. New rainfall and weeks of stored melt simultaneously. The frozen ground below absorbed almost nothing. In January 1862, there was no weather forecast system, no network. The mountain runoff could reach the valley floor in 12 to 24 hours, and no one on the valley floor would know it was coming until it arrived. By January 10th, the damage was already visible across the system. Bridges torn from their pilings. Rivers climbing to levels with no recorded precedent. A telegram arrived from the mountains in the kind of language people use when normal language stops working. It rains like fury. Hell is afloat. Look out for water. Inside Sacramento, the levees revealed what they actually were. The American River punched through the eastern defenses and flooded the city. But the railroad embankment held on the south and west. The barrier that had been built to keep the river out now kept the floodwater in. No drain, no exit. Downtown Sacramento ended up under roughly 10 feet of water, the exact height of a regulation basketball rim. The net would have been drifting on the surface. Streets became canals, storefronts vanished to their upper windows. Families crowded into second floors and attics. One woman with 2 small children dragged a heavy trunk on top of a bed, the last dry island in the room, and stood on it with ice-cold water rising to her feet before a passing boat finally reached her. So officials did the only thing left. They sent prisoners to cut their own levee. Men standing inside the flooded Capitol, hacking into the earth wall that was supposed to save them. When it finally gave way, dark water surged through the cut and ripped 25 houses off their foundations. Leland Stanford, California's newly elected governor, reached his own inauguration by rowboat. That evening, by some accounts, he entered his own house through a second-floor window. That is what this flood did to a state capital. But Sacramento was only one piece of it. Farther south, Tulare Lake, a closed basin with no route to the sea, rose above its natural threshold and spilled into the San Joaquin system. The Kern River burst from its canyon and spread across open land 22 miles wide, wider than the English Channel at its narrowest crossing. At peak, the Central Valley was no longer a valley. It was an inland freshwater sea, nearly 300 miles long. Steamboats traveled far inland across submerged ranch country. Wind had enough open water to build waves, and those waves struck the upper windows of farmhouses that had been sitting in open fields 2 weeks earlier. A man named Keyes left the flooded city by small boat and was caught out on that open water by a squall, his boat filled. He grabbed a telegraph pole, one of many sticking out of the surface in that part of the valley, and held on over open water until 2 men, Chatterton and Keithley, pulled him off. The same 43-day chain was not finished. Hundreds of miles to the south, the last storm pulse was still moving through the canyons. At Agua Mansa in San Bernardino County, Father Borgata heard the roar from the canyons on the night of January 22nd and rang the church bell. People woke, understood the sound, and climbed uphill to the cemetery ground above the flood line. The settlement below was destroyed, but not in any ordinary way. Agua Mansa was built largely of adobe. Adobe does not shatter, it softens, it bulges, it dissolves. The buildings did not collapse, they melted. What the flood left behind was not wreckage, it was paste. Roughly 500 people stood on that hillside afterward with nothing left. In the Sierra mining camps, there was no bell. The flood arrived as sound, a low freight train roar building from up canyon. What came through the gorges was not moving water. It was slurry, mining debris, shattered granite, uprooted trees, and the entire contents of upstream canyons moving sideways at speed. Log walls splintered and became projectiles. Brick structures absorbed the slurry and collapsed inward. Whole encampments were erased. The number most often cited is 4,000 dead. That figure is a statistical extrapolation, roughly 1% of California's population at the time. The verified count from local records sits somewhere between 400 and 1,000. The gap between those numbers is filled by people no one went looking for. Chinese miners pushed onto the lowest river bars by years of discriminatory taxes, their camps erased without a tally. Indigenous communities whose losses were measured not in bodies found, but in everything that was no longer there. Many of the people who could have counted were gone. When the storms finally broke after 43 days, the disaster did not stop. Sacramento remained underwater for months. The state legislature relocated to San Francisco. State workers went without pay for nearly 18 months. At least 200,000 head of livestock died, roughly a quarter of the state's herd. Damage estimates reached around $100 million, roughly $4 billion in today's money. And then Sacramento lifted itself. Over the following years, the entire downtown district was raised by 10 to 14 feet, unevenly, block by block. Screwjacks drove under foundations across whole neighborhoods. Brick buildings rose inch by inch while streets were filled in beneath them. The original front doors became basement windows. Original first floors became underground passages. In Old Sacramento today, you can walk those buried rooms exactly where the water left them. Sediment cores show that floods of this magnitude have struck California roughly every 100 to 200 years across the last 2,000. Climate models have since doubled the estimated probability of another one. Every winter, storms still line up over the Pacific and aim at the same valley. The bowl is still there. The outlet is still narrow. This time, millions of people are living at the bottom of it.